So I'm just going to share my testimony today. So I don't know if most of you know this or not, but I've been a Christian for most of my life, and I was raised in a Christian family. And I've grown up in a church, and I'm extremely thankful for that, but it makes putting a testimony together really difficult, because I didn't have a huge event in my life where I finally saw Jesus, because I've seen him my whole life. But, so I don't really remember actually the event that actually changed my life, or when and where it necessarily changed my life. But I know that at one point in my life, I realized that I'm a sinner, that I need God's forgiveness, and that before I received Christ, I was not living my life with a purpose. And as I just said, I've been a Christian my entire life, but for most of it, I was just going through the motions. And it didn't start becoming real until around my freshman year. And before my freshman year, being a Christian was like a duty. I had to do it. Okay, I had to go to church on Sundays and Wednesdays and go to youth group. I had to wake up early and all that stuff. But after I started living my life for Jesus, being a Christian was no longer a burden. It was something I wanted to do. I wanted to go to church, and I wanted to use my youth group. And I wanted to be around Christian friends and live my life to get the way God wanted me to. And I realized there's nothing better than having a desire to learn about God and strengthen your relationship with Him. But my life changed during the mission trip in Mexico. And I don't necessarily remember what exact part that happened in Mexico changed my life, but I know it will change me forever. And it gave me the urge to want to know God and to have a stronger relationship with Him. And I think it was because in Mexico, I saw poverty, people who were living on the streets and people who lived in dirt and cardboard houses. And they had awful jobs, they had long hours, they had terrible working conditions, and they got paid very little. And I imagined living like that. Can you imagine living in a cardboard house and barely getting any money for doing awful work? And it makes me think that you would hate life and you would be negative. The thing is, they weren't. They realized that they had God and that's all they needed, and they were happy with that. And they just had a strong love for Jesus, even in that awful situation. They had nothing, but Jesus was all they needed. And these people have more joy than any one of us do in the United States, and we have so much more than they do. It should be easy for us to have so much joy with all the things we have, but we don't. They're just so joyful. They're a family, and they love God and each other. And I wanted that. I wanted the contentment that they had, and they truly understood that God is in control and that they can trust Him. And this last summer, I came upon a similar situation. I came upon someone who literally had nothing, and they lost everything. But he still knew God was in control. His name was Cody. And I met him at Steak and Shake in Indianapolis on my way home from a church conference in Louisville. And this man literally lost everything. He didn't have much to start with, but he had enough. He had all of his things in his carry-on bag on the flight. Obviously his wallet, his ID, all his clothes, everything. And on the flight it was stolen. So Cody went from having an average life to homeless. So I met him in Steak and Shake. He had a cardboard sign that said homeless. And I started talking to him. And he told me how he lost everything and his whole life went down the drain. And he told me he was a Christian. So while I was talking to him, I asked him, where do you think God is right now? Are you angry with God for putting you in a situation where you have nothing? Where do you think He is? And his answer was incredible. He explained to me that God has been with him the entire time. And God has been the only thing he has had. He has nothing, but he has the only thing he needs. He has God. And without God, he said he'd be lost. And I'm like, could I even have that perspective? I even have everything. I feel like I'm in control. If you have nothing, how can you? I thought that perspective was amazing to have in a time like that. So God was his hope, and it's where he had his trust. And even though he had nothing, he was content. And he could trust in God and have his hope in God. Just like the people did in Mexico. And the Bible talks about how having less is more and more is less. In Proverbs 16:8 it says, it is better to have little with godliness than to be rich and dishonest. So if we have too much in this world, we can become consumed by it, and it's easy to. Just think of some extremely wealthy people, Donald Trump is rich and so is Hillary Clinton. Do they seem like happy people? I don't know. They have so much money, but I don't think I want to like them. But we start to think when we have enough that we are good enough by ourselves and that we do not need God. But the people who don't have as much as we do, they depend on God. They trust in Him and have a strong relationship with Him. and they realize that they truly need Him and that they can't do it on their own. That is why people who have less on this earth have more with God. It is better to have little with godliness than to be rich and dishonest. Just like people in Mexico or the homeless man in Steak and Shake. So after Mexico, I realized I wanted to live my life differently. I wanted to live for God and not for myself. And I wanted to truly trust in God and be content at where I am in life. So I tried to start turning away from my sins and starting to making an urge to glorify God. And I wasn't perfect at it. I still failed, but I was giving it my full effort. And I have understood the gospel my entire life, but it didn't actually start affecting me until I actually understood what it meant and the sacrifice that took place. Because I've known that God sent His Son to die an awful death on the cross for me so that I can be saved and my sins are forgiven, and that He rose from the dead after He was crucified 3 days later. I've known this all my life, but I realized that I started to expect it. Like, of course, God sent His Son to die for me. Why wouldn't He? But it was a time for me, it was a time that I actually understood what it was saying, that God didn't need me, and I'm worthless. He loves me, but I am actually worthless to Him because He doesn't need me, but He loves me anyway. And after I understood that God sent His Son even though He didn't have to, and when I realized how much God truly loves us, it was a lot easier for me to change my life. And I was able to devote my life to God. After coming home from Mexico, I started returning to my normal life. I started to go through the everyday motions. Waking up early, going to school, having sports, coming home, doing homework, being tired, and forgetting about God. Starting to do things on my own. And I still had the desire to devote my life to Christ, but it wasn't as big, and it eventually died down. Like many things, we are excited about it at the moment, but we eventually forget it. When that happens, we need to realize who God is. God is someone who should not be forgotten or left to come back later. He died on the cross. He sacrificed everything. You can't just take Him and set Him aside because we say we don't need Him. He paid the ultimate sacrifice. And I know that happens to me. I know that happens to us. We need to be encouraging one another to make God a priority in our lives and not let our desire for God die down. And I remember last year, I went through a phase where I really just pushed God aside. I didn't think I needed Him. I thought life was good. I didn't need Him. I was doing things fine. I just forgot about Him. And one night for youth group, we went to the movie Woodlawn. And that movie strongly convicted me. That night, I couldn't even sleep. And I decided that I needed to redevote my life to Jesus and ask for His forgiveness. And I was going through a phase where I thought I was good enough and I could do things on my own. And I forgot about God and I left Him in the dust. I decided I needed to change, and I needed to change at that exact moment. I did not want to wait. So I literally, that night, I just fell to my knees, and I prayed like I never had before. I prayed for forgiveness, and I told God that I failed, and I need Him, and that I wanted to redevote my life to Him. And I prayed for an energy to crave God and to want to glorify Him and strengthen my relationship with Him. So that night, I devoted my life, my every day, my every second to God. And so now I live for a purpose. I live to glorify God and to fulfill His will. If I'm struggling or things aren't going my way, I have hope that God is in control. I also know that God won't put us through anything we can't handle. I'm able to put all my hope and trust in Him, and I want to live for Him and His will. God created me and every one of you for a purpose, and there is nothing better than living for the purpose that God created you for. And I know I am a sinner, and I know that I fail, but I also know that God has forgiven me. And every day I want to live for God, and I've realized that I cannot live without Him. I need God's strength, His love, His promise, and without God, I would be lost and not have a purpose to live for. And most of all, I need the hope I can find in God. And this year, we've tried to talk a lot about hope. It's our theme for this year, especially because there's a lot of hopeless things in this world. Just like looking at the presidential election, that doesn't give me much hope. Or looking about my future with uncertainty, or about college, or the debt we might get from college. None of those things don't give me hope. But God guarantees us hope in Him, hope in eternal life, and that He is always in control. And I know that God will never leave me. After receiving God and redevoting my life to Him, I now live for a purpose. And I just want to challenge you to trust in God and to know that He is always in control and that He is with you. I want to challenge you to put your trust in Him and find your hope in Him. Because if you have accepted Jesus and devoted your life for him, you will have all these things. You will have the hope he promises you, the forgiveness, the strength you can find in him. And if you were like me, where you were just going through the motions, or being a Christian was a burden to you, or you're just going through a phase where you push God out, I challenge you to redevote your life to Christ. Because there's no greater purpose to live for God if you will to put your trust in him. So just join me in putting your trust and hope in God. Now I'd just like to close with this verse. I think it's on your handouts, Romans 10:9-10. If you openly declare that Jesus is Lord, and declare in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For it is written, by believing in your heart that you are made right with God, it is by openly declaring your faith that you are saved. So be saved, declare your faith, and believe in your heart that you are made right with God.